Hi, my name is Eliza, and the fact that I am currently writing a book has kind of taken over my entire personality. I recently finished writing the first 3 chapters of my book and had given myself 2 weeks to complete the next 3 chapters. This was a slightly overly ambitious goal considering my habit to procrastinate and also to get stuck, which happened a lot. But I did my best, so here goes. Chapters 4 through 6 are documenting the situations that lead into the situation that the characters find themselves in at the beginning of chapter 1. These 3 chapters are told through various materials that have been gathered by my narrator for the purpose of telling how these characters ended up in the situation that they are in chapter 1. And they go on a chapter by chapter basis for each character. So chapter 4 is for one of my main characters, chapter 5 is for another of my main characters, and chapter 6 is for my third main character. So, beginning with chapter 4. I wrote a fair amount of chapter 4 in sort of bits and pieces in the early part of March when I was still thinking that I would be able to be productive on both writing this book and writing my senior art history thesis paper. I'm almost done with chapter 4. Haven't made as much progress in the last couple of days because things got busy with class again, but yeah. Making progress still. Chapter 4 is very, very close to being done, which is a wild thought. Is a really, really wild thought. Progress. That did not quite go as planned, and the art history paper certainly took precedence. So I ended up coming back to chapter 4 right after finishing chapter 3. And it was, considering that I only had a couple of small pieces left to finish for it, it didn't take very long to wrap up. Of these 3 chapters, chapter 4 is the one that I by far had the most material and understanding of the events for going into it, as a lot of this material was written for the NaNoWriMo class that I took 2 years ago. At that time, I was still trying to write everything in chronological order, and so these events actually take place before the events of chapter 1. Besides that, I was also still trying to write in rotating perspectives among my 3 main characters, which I am not doing anymore. I have one narrator, and I'm very happy with this narrator. However, I had a lot of this material written for one character in terms of the events that lead them to chapter 1, and not a lot of material written for the other 2 main characters in terms of how they get to chapter 1. So chapter 4 was the easiest to pull together out of chapters 4 through 6, and is actually, as of right now, the only one that I actually have done. Chapter 4 was the easy part. It was after finishing chapter 4 that my grand plan of finishing chapters 4 through 6 in 2 weeks ran into some slight problems. One of the main struggles I've had that's impacted the process for this particular section, I think, is that I've been a little bit up in the air about how the story structure and the act structure specifically is going to really work with this draft. Specifically, I've been kind of hung up on the fact that my original planned Act 1 now takes place entirely before the story starts in chapter 1. My initial plan was that there would be rotating character perspectives throughout the events until they all end up in the same place. However, I got tired of writing that and so decided to try a different starting point for the story, which is to take out Act 1 entirely, the original Act 1, and have that all happen prior to chapter 1. And then I just told myself I would figure it out as far as the act structure from this new starting point. And then I didn't figure out this act structure from the new starting point, and I just started writing, which is good and helpful and fine, until I reached the point of writing chapters 4 through 6, which specifically deal with some of the events from that original Act 1 chunk of the story. Really, what I need to do is sit down and make a new outline and go through how the act structure will look from this new starting point. I have an outline, but I've changed a couple things, namely that dragons are back in the story, and I've figured out some things as far as their role in the story. So I need to go back through and do some reworking. Also, I cannot find my original outline because I wrote it on paper, and it is in a notebook somewhere, I'm sure, but I cannot put my hands on it right now. So we're gonna just do a new one and see what sticks from that one when I eventually rediscover it. I did, at least in the process of writing chapters 1 through 3, have some idea of what the new Act 1 of the book will look like, so at least there's that, but I would like to have a stronger sense of how the rest of the book will play out in terms of the structure, because I really have no idea how long this is going to be, and I tend to not be concise. But I've decided that it's a first draft, so I can write out everything that my little heart desires, and we can narrow it down from there, because it is more productive to write everything out and narrow it down than it is to sit and stare at a blank document. This is a recurring argument that I have with myself on a nearly daily, hourly basis. It's gonna work itself out. Okay, so I've written a new outline. I just figured it out. I was up until some late hours of the night last night working on writing out an outline, which was pretty bare bones in the actuality of it, but it was something and it existed. And I have just figured out the plot twist in Act 3, and I've figured out how it ties everything together and how all of the characters are tied together and how it will impact them, and I'm so excited. I just figured it out. I started with just a very basic order of events, 3-act structure outline, and left a fair bit of it vague. Currently trying to balance having a solid idea of where the story goes and also being open and adaptable for future inspirations and ideas to be incorporated as they come up. Especially during the writing of chapters 1 through 3, I really felt like as I had momentum going, new ideas would pop up all the time and I'd be able to go, oh, okay, this needs to happen in chapter 7, or this needs to happen at this point in the story. And I think as a writer, I work much better if I leave that flexibility rather than having everything planned out completely. I've certainly had many situations where I wrote the outline too thoroughly and then was completely unable to regain the inspiration for the scenes that I had planned out. With that said, I did still spend a ridiculously long amount of time today working on a more detailed outline. Specifically, all I've done so far is Act 1, but it's pretty thorough, and I think I have a solid plan for the rest of Act 1. I'm leaving it open for the next couple of days to continue to develop Acts 2 and 3 a little bit more, although I am specifically leaving the ending very vague and broad strokes because I want to be able to see what feels like it makes the most sense and wraps things up cohesively when I actually get to the point of writing the ending. So that'll be a bridge I cross when I get there. I don't know what it is about these old pieces of paper. I found them in a stack of art supplies, and I've just written both the vague outline and the much more detailed outline on these sheets of paper. So that's pretty cool. I don't know what it is about that, but I'm also writing extremely small on the detailed one because I've got a lot to say, and there's a lot going on. One thing I've definitely learned is there's a lot going on in my story. This should be interesting to try to keep track of all of the plot lines while I am writing them. I suspect I might need an in-progress outline that I just update whenever I add a new thing or whenever a new point gets added to an existing storyline. That might actually be helpful. I think I need a running tally. There are many different threads that are being woven together for this story, so this is what I get for having 10 years of material for this plot in my head now. Anyway, it feels pretty good to have these outlines, and I think that will be very helpful in the coming days as I attempt to regain my momentum with writing Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Chapter 5 has been a huge challenge for me in more ways than one. I was not really anticipating it being this much of a challenge, but here we are. The character who is the focus of chapter 5 is not quite as forthcoming as the character who is the focus of chapter 4, so it's been a little bit of start, stop, trying to figure out exactly how to structure the chapter and figure out how to capture events from her perspective. Also, right when I started working on chapter 5, I started to feel a little bit off, which happens sometimes. That's fine. It happens. But it made sitting down to write and focus on writing a little bit more difficult. And also I got out of my rhythm of writing for an hour at the start of every day because I stopped sleeping very well and would just roll over and go back to sleep in the morning when I was supposed to be getting up and writing. But it's okay. We persevere. This is the way it is. It happens. As it stands now, I think I have about half of the material that I need for chapter 5 written or drafted in some form. Some of it's incredibly rough, but I just had to tell myself to write something, otherwise I was going to lose my mind. So it exists, some part of it exists, and I will just have to keep working on it and keep developing it, and eventually it will be a chapter that I am satisfied with. This is just how it goes sometimes. I'm going to set myself another slightly overly ambitious goal and plan to have chapters 5 and 6 completed by the time of the next video. We'll see how this goes. I do have a much more solid plan for how both chapters 5 and 6 will go now with this outline, so hopefully the issues will be resolved and I will not be stuck anymore. I would like to not be stuck anymore. Being stuck is not fun. Hoping to be intentional and set aside a solid amount of time for writing every day in the next bit so that I can regain that momentum. So we'll see how it goes. I also realized I forgot to say anything about the book itself in the first video. It is a fantasy adventure book and there is lots of magic and dragons involved, set in a sort of fairy tale world, but the degree to which the fairy tales will actually have any influence on the story remains to be seen. Most importantly, there's dragons and swords, lots of magic happenings. I'm really looking forward to being done with this whole chapters 4 through 6 section, because that means that I can get to this chapters 7 through 9 section, which is really when things start pushing towards Act 2, which I'm very excited about, and also I have not written in many years. All of the stuff that I've written in recent years, specifically during that novel writing class, was all within Act 1. I haven't made it past Act 1 since I think I was 15 years old, and I'm 23 now, so I think it's time that we get to Act 2. So stay tuned, and hopefully the next time I see you, I will have finished chapters 5 and 6. So I will be keeping my fingers crossed. Thank you for watching, and until next time.